Okay, so today's program is herbs growing and best uses. So why should you grow and use fresh herbs? So one main thing that I like to think about is the cost. So if you look at the grocery store to buy either dried or fresh herbs, they are very expensive. And so I don't know if everybody will be able to see this, but I've got an example of this is like a little less than an ounce size of dill seeds. And this is a product that I use in some of my pickle making that I do. So as an example, this is a quarter pint jar. So this is 4 ounces. This is almost 4 times as much product. This little less than 1 ounce one is $5 at the grocery store. And I got all of this from maybe one dill plant, just cutting off the seed heads and saving them and drying them out. Also with fresh herbs, regardless of what you're trying to make with fresh herbs, whatever you buy at the grocery store, it's either not enough or it's way too much and you end up throwing a bunch of it out. So if you can grow your own, then you can go outside and harvest just what you need, for whatever you're doing. And then it continues to grow and you can use it more and you're not wasting it either, getting too much and having to throw it away or whatever. Another good reason is taste. Fresh herbs add so much flavor to your food. The more I've started using herbs in my cooking, I can really tell a big difference. Some dishes more than others, but one example that I have is I make a homemade stuffing, dressing, whatever you want to call it, and it uses all fresh herbs and it tastes incredible. And I get more compliments on that when I make it for a special meal with our families, like Thanksgiving or whatever. People are always like, oh my gosh, this dressing is so good. And it really does make a difference in your cooking. Also, there's health benefits to eating and using herbs. Herbs traditionally have been used medicinally in teas or tinctures. And herbs also contain protective polyphenols, which are plant compounds with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. So studies show polyphenols in herbs can help combat cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and more. So herbs are great for pollinators too. I probably have on my phone, no lie, probably 100 pictures of bees on my herb plants. They seem to really love basil. So on the screen, you see a bumblebee on a basil plant. That's from last year. My basil plants are not that big yet. And then also a swallowtail butterfly caterpillar on my dill plant. And I thought I had pictures. One year, this was really cool. We had some swallowtail butterfly caterpillars had made their chrysalis on the dill plants. And I think we had 2. And I happened to see them, and so I was able to cut them off and put them in a big glass container and give them to my neighbor who has a young child. I think he might have been like 5 at the time, so that he could watch them hatch out of the chrysalis. So that was pretty cool. But herbs are great for pollinators because there's lots of flowers, and most herbs tend to last for a while, so you've got more opportunity for pollinators. So as far as growing herbs, you can do several different ways. You can have a dedicated herb garden, an area in your yard, because some herbs are perennial, so they'll come back each year, and some are annuals, and so you need to plant them again each year. But you can have a dedicated space in your yard, and that's what we've added. In 2020, we added an herb garden bed that's right beside our house. So literally I can walk out my kitchen door and cut some herbs for whatever I'm doing and take them right back in. It's just right there. But herbs are also very easy to grow in containers. Even perennial ones can do pretty well in a container if you take care of it and make sure it's not getting too big for your container. But you definitely want to think about your space, the herbs that you want to grow, and figure out what's going to work best with what you want to grow and your space. And then a couple options for perennial herbs if you'd like to actually create an herb garden space in your yard and you have the space for it. Some herbs that are perennials are chives, mint, which you got to be careful with mint because they can really take over an area, oregano, rosemary, sage, and thyme. And so here's a picture of our herb bed. This is when my husband first built it in 2020. But so you want to think about before you're going to plant and grow your herbs, again, your space, what type of containers and or bed space are you going to use, what herbs you want to grow, how big they're going to get, if they're perennial or not, and then starting from seed versus buying seedlings or plants. And I've got a couple of pictures here just to kind of show with some perennial herbs. So we've got our herb bed from 2020 when we built it and added some of the plants. And so you can kind of see there's a little tiny rosemary at the far right of that herb bed. And so this year, I took this picture this week, the herb bed 2022, that's our rosemary plant now. It's like easily, like almost 10 times bigger than it was 2 years ago. And then I've got a couple more closer up pictures of the rosemary. And then my sage plant came back, and this year it has these beautiful purple flowers. So it's like a bonus. I'm so happy that the sage came back, but then also that now it's got these really beautiful flowers on it too. So using herbs in cooking, there's several different ways you can use herbs, fresh or dried. You can add fresh herbs anywhere. Dried herbs are called for in a recipe. The kind of ratio is 1 tablespoon fresh is equal to 1 teaspoon dried, because the flavor tends to concentrate when you dry it. One of my favorite ways to use herbs is making pestos, and those, in my experience, they freeze pretty well. You can make herb butter. That's kind of pictured on the slide. You could do herb salts with dried herbs and mixing it with salt to create, an herb flavored salt. You could freeze in olive oil, and that's another one of the pictures is you can cut up or do whole, depending on what it is, and use ice cube trays and put olive oil, and then you can pop that out and use it, in a soup or in another use of cooking. You can also create herb infused oils or vinegars. You can add either fresh or dried to baked goods like bread or biscuits. One of my new favorite things, I make biscuits almost every week for myself for part of my breakfast. And I've started adding rosemary, and they are even better than just plain, because I really love rosemary. So that just really adds like another level to your food. And you can also top salads, pasta, pizza, all kinds of things with fresh herbs that you could cut up to use them that way as well. Like I said, pesto is one of my favorite ways to use herbs. And so you don't have to just use basil. I really like basil pesto, but you can do a mixture of herbs. You could do basil with other herbs or wholly other herbs, whatever your taste preferences are. But this picture just kind of shows like from the basil leaves to the actual pesto, and then some that I had frozen. So one of my goals in 2020, because I was home a lot more, like everybody was, I was like, I am going to make as much pesto as I can and freeze it. And so, I made I think each of these containers is like a 1 cup container. But so I tried to make a bunch, and then that's another way that you can enjoy it throughout the year too, because basil is not going to necessarily last. It's not going to be a perennial herb that's going to come back or hang around through the winter. You can also dry and preserve herbs several different ways. You can hang herbs to dry. You may have seen that in pictures or magazines. You can dry them in the oven. If you have an actual dehydrator, you can do it that way too. You can also collect the herb seeds to use in cooking or to plant next year. And like I had my example of the dill seeds, that I could use these to either plant more dill or use them in making pickles. You can create your own dried herb blends to use yourself or give as gifts. So that's going to be one of my, I don't know that I'm going to get it all the way done this year, but one of my goals, excuse me, is going to be to make my own kind of like Italian seasoning herb blend to use when I make tomato sauce. So we grow a pretty big garden, and I make and can tomato sauce from our tomatoes that we grow. And so it would be really cool. It's really cool when you're making your dinner or food or whatever, and you've grown the materials that you're using. And so I'm like, it would be even more cool to be able to have, not only did we grow the tomatoes, but we grew and dried the herbs for the seasoning. So that's going to be one of my goals in the next year or so. And then there's other ways you can use herbs in your home. So you can create your own infused oils. And I do want to clarify that infused oils are not the same as essential oils. In order to create your own essential oils, you would have to distill them like alcohol, which would be, that is way outside of my wheelhouse, and that you have to have special equipment. So anyway, I just want to make that clear, like infused oils are different than essential oils. And then you can also make tinctures and medicinal teas to help with various ailments or seasonal allergies, all different kind of things like that. And a tincture, I hope I'm saying it correctly, is an herbal extraction where you extract the beneficial compounds from fresh or dried herbs by macerating it in alcohol or glycerin for 2 to 6 weeks. And we'll get into some resources dealing with that a little bit further into the presentation. You can also make beauty products, lotions, soaps, those types of things, household cleaning products, if you are interested in making your own more natural cleaning products, and even natural bug repellents. And I've also read that sometimes if you plant different herb plants in certain areas, it can help deter mosquitoes. Now, I don't know how close you need to sit to the herb plants in order for that to be beneficial, but it can't hurt to have that kind of stuff in your yard to help with that. So a couple of online resources, Pinterest, you can just fall down the Pinterest rabbit hole, and I think I had typed in, I think I just typed in herbs, and this screenshot showed some of the things that came up just typing in herbs, not even cooking. You could do more specific cooking with herbs, medicinal herbs, all kinds of growing herbs, whatever, and get more hits or more different links. But there's tons and tons of stuff on Pinterest, gardening related, cooking related, gift related, if you want to try to make something to give as a gift. Pinterest is a great resource. I will say with Pinterest, if you find a link or an article that you like, you might want to try to print it or save it somehow, because oftentimes I found links kind of go bad over time, or you try to go back to something that you put on a board in Pinterest and the link doesn't work anymore. So that's just one thing to kind of think about. Another great online resource that you can also fall down the YouTube rabbit hole. YouTube has tons of gardening and cooking videos. And so I just had typed in growing herbs and did a screenshot of all the different things that come up when you type in growing herbs. So, in containers, indoors, from seeds, all different kinds of ways. Same, you could type in cooking with herbs, or, all different other things to find all different kinds of videos. And YouTube is great if you're more of a visual learner. So like for myself, I'm not as much of a visual learner what my husband is. So if we're trying to do something new with our garden or yard or whatever, he often will go to YouTube first to try to find some videos of examples of what he's trying to do. A few other online resources. Homesteaders of America is a group that I found out about, I guess, in 2020. But basically, it's a group of people who are interested in homesteading in any kind of way. You don't have to have a farm. You don't have to be keeping livestock to get to benefit from their website and this organization. They've got a blog, and they do a lot on social media with articles about gardening, preserving, homesteading. They also offer more than one in-person conference with hands-on classes and workshops and vendors. So if this is something that you're interested in, that's a good resource for whether you're a beginner or you're more advanced. And then Amy Fuel is actually one of the founders of Homesteaders of America. And on her personal website, she is very much into herbalism, and she has tons and tons of articles and recipes for herbs on her website. She also has some online courses about homestead herbalism, and there is a fee for that, but it looks like it's pretty in depth. So if that's something that you would like to get more into, that's a resource for that. I've also got one of her books as a resource further into our presentation today, but we've met her at the Homesteaders of America and in-person event, and so she really does a lot, and so I would trust her information. And then Susan Belsinger, her website, I've got 2 of her books that we'll talk about in just a minute on the other resources page. So she's written a couple of books specifically about herbs, and on her website, she's got links for seasonal recipes and all the books that she's written, but she also links to other articles about gardening. So her blog goes to the Fine Gardening website. So not every article is by her, but they are all gardening related articles that were featured in Fine Gardening magazine. So some book resources, and all of these book resources are available through the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library for checkout. Some of them we have both in print and an ebook, but I think all the ones that I'm going to talk about, I looked at the physical print book. The Culinary Herbal is by Susan Belsinger and Arthur Tucker. And this is like just basically an alphabetical list of herbs with information about varieties, growing, harvesting, preserving, just anything to do with using herbs for cooking, more specifically. And then the next book is Grow Your Own Herbs by the same authors, Susan Belsinger and Arthur Tucker. And this is more dealing with the growing part than using them to cook, even though it includes both, but it has chapters on growing, including indoors, if you want to try to grow some indoors, harvesting and preserving, and using in cooking. And it gives more detailed growing, preserving, and cooking tips for 40 specific herbs. So both of those, are good. One has kind of got more of the focus on growing, but they also both have stuff about using them in cooking. And then The Cook's Herb Garden by Jeff Cox and Marie-Pierre Moyne. It has chapters on choosing what herbs to grow, growing them, harvesting and preserving, and cooking with herbs. It's kind of like a good general overall book. And that one also has a lot of really helpful pictures. So, with gardening and or cookbooks, it's nice to have pictures to kind of like see get ideas and see more different things. So that one has a lot of really good pictures. The next one that I'm going to talk about is called Essential Herbs, and it's by DK Publishing. So it has 3 sections, a chart with which herbs help with various ailments, an alphabetical list of herbs and how to source and use them, and then 150 recipes for homemade herbal remedies. Now, the only downside of this book is the alphabetical list is by the Latin plant name, which I'm guessing not everybody knows all the Latin names of all the plants. I don't. So that was the only downside to that book, but I did feel like it had a lot of really good information. So I included it anyway, because depending on if you're wanting to kind of go the more herbal remedy route, this book would probably be more helpful. And then some further book resources. So The Homesteader's Herbal Companion by Amy Fuel. And this is, more an herbalist book. So everything she does cover growing, preserving, home and beauty products, cooking, and even using with animals. And some of the things that she talks about do use essential oils, but some are using actual fresh or dried herbs as well. And then Complete Container Herb Gardening by Sue Getz has 3 sections, containers and location, using herbs in cooking, medicinally in the home, and then growing. So this is another good, just like overall talk about all the different aspects of herbs, growing, using them different ways, and figuring out where to plant them in your, put them in your yard. And I also liked in this book that it included suggestions of like, if you want to grow, if you're interested in like more Italian cooking or whatever, like here, grow these herbs together to be able to do X, Y, and Z with it. So I thought it gave some good suggestions that way. The next one is called Natural Home Cleaning by Fern Green. And it's a comprehensive natural cleaning guide. I mean, with tons and tons and tons of recipes for homemade cleaners. Now, I will say this one uses more essential oils than actual physical fresh or dried herbs, but there were a few that included fresh herbs. But I just included this one because if that's something that you're interested in, this was like a really good comprehensive book that had a lot of different types of cleaners that you can make yourself. And then the Herbal Kitchen by Cami McBride has a wide variety of recipes for medicinal and culinary herb uses. So it focused more on the uses than on the actual growing. But there are tons and tons and tons of, gardening books, cooking cookbooks, that would incorporate herbs. These were just some that I found that were more specific to herbs, specifically growing and using them. But like I said, most general gardening books are going to talk about things that would be helpful with herbs. A lot of cookbooks, are going to include using herbs in the cooking. So there's definitely plenty of other resources out there. So we will open it up to questions. Let me stop my screen sharing, and then I'm going to